They called her the Jug, this behemoth of a fighter plane. And I remember the first time I saw one, parked on the muddy apron of the airfield in England, thinking, this is supposed to fight the sleek Messerschmitts and the nimble Focke-Wulfs. It looks like a flying bathtub. The other pilots, especially the ones who'd flown the Spitfires or, God forbid, were holding out for the whispered about P-51 Mustang, they'd sneer. They'd say the P-47 Thunderbolt was a lead sled, a slow-climbing, sluggish dogfighter, too heavy, too big, a beautiful disaster of American industrial muscle, and that we were going to be target practice over Germany. They had the numbers, the data points, the feel of it, all saying we were second-rate. They'd always focus on the sluggishness at lower altitudes, the initial climb rate that felt like trying to swim through molasses, the sheer, undeniable bulk of that radial engine cowling. But what they missed, what they all failed to grasp, was the singular, deadly secret that turned this so-called too-slow fighter into the greatest high-altitude predator and the most survivable aircraft of the war. They focused on what she lacked at ground level, but they were blind to what she owned at 30,000 feet. And that blinding power, that secret weapon, is the reason I'm alive today and why men like me came home when others, in faster, lighter planes, didn't. Was I wrong for ignoring the naysayers and betting my life on the massive, 9-ton Jug instead of a lighter, more fashionable fighter? Tell me honestly if you would have dismissed the one thing that truly mattered: altitude performance. I want to take you back to the beginning, to when I was just a fresh-faced lieutenant, barely out of flight school, my hands still smelling faintly of hydraulic fluid and nervous sweat. My name is Jack, but everyone called me Spud. I think because I looked a little too round-faced for a fighter pilot, which of course didn't help when I was assigned to the Jug, the literal flying potato. I arrived at the 56th Fighter Group in early '43, just as the P-47s were starting to be introduced to the European theater of operations. The tension in the air was thick, a mix of freezing fog and sheer raw fear. The 8th Air Force was taking a brutal beating. The B-17s, our beloved flying fortresses, were being massacred deep inside Germany, and the fighter escorts, mostly early model Spitfires and P-38 Lightnings, simply couldn't go far enough or climb high enough to truly protect them. We needed a true high-altitude, long-range escort, and the P-47 was the first answer we got. The first pilot I met was Captain Gabby Gabreski, a man who even then carried the quiet, deadly confidence of a born ace. He was a P-47 man through and through, but even he couldn't stop the constant grinding criticism. The Spitfire jockeys, they'd look over at our planes and mock the Pratt & Whitney R-2800 double wasp engine, a behemoth of a radial motor that was so huge the landing gear had to telescope down 9 full inches just to clear the massive propeller. The engine itself was incredible, a twin-row, 18-cylinder monster kicking out over 2,000 horsepower. But it was the turbo supercharger system that was the real marvel, and the source of all the Jug's unusual characteristics. Alexander Kartveli, the brilliant Georgian engineer who designed her, had basically built the plane around that turbo. The entire fuselage, from the cockpit back to the tail, was a massive ductwork, channeling the exhaust gases from that huge engine, running it all the way back to the turbine wheel housed in the deep belly of the aircraft, and then piping the compressed high-pressure air back forward to the engine's carburetor. It was an incredibly complex, heavy system, and that was the source of the Thunderbolt's weight, its bulk, its slowness at low altitude, but also its absolute game-changing strength. My trainer, a cynical old lieutenant named Duke, hammered this into my head every day. "Listen, Spud," he'd bark, leaning over the cockpit rim, the stench of stale coffee on his breath. "You can forget dogfighting a Messerschmitt below 15,000 feet. You try to turn with a 109 down low, he'll spin inside you and chew you up before you've completed half a rotation. You're slow to accelerate, you're heavy, and you don't turn on a dime. The Hun knows this. They will try to suck you down to their level." He made suck sound like a dirty word. "But," Duke would say, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial growl, his eyes alight, "what do we have that they don't? We have an air pump the size of a small car strapped behind your seat, and it is designed to laugh at the very air pressure that chokes their engines to death. At high altitude, where the air is thin and frigid, the altitudes where the B-17s fly, 25,000 feet, 30,000 feet, sometimes even 35,000 feet, every other piston engine fighter in the sky, German or Allied, starts to gasp. Their engines, relying on simpler single- or two-stage superchargers, lose manifold pressure, their horsepower drops off a cliff, and their speed and maneuverability degrade rapidly. But that's where the Jug's secret power came into its own. That massive exhaust-driven turbo supercharger, spinning at over 20,000 RPM, was constantly force-feeding the R-2800 compressed air. It meant that at 30,000 feet, while the Messerschmitts were struggling along on half their rated power, the P-47 was still putting out nearly full rated horsepower. I mean, think about that for a second. We didn't just maintain our speed. We were actually faster than the enemy fighters at their combat ceiling. The critics called us slow, but up where it mattered. In the freezing thin air where the escort mission truly happened, we were the fastest thing on the block, often exceeding 420, 430 miles per hour, sometimes more. I vividly remember my first real escort mission, a deep penetration raid into Schweinfurt. The target was a ball-bearing factory, and the flak was described to us as thick enough to walk on. We took off before dawn, the huge props churning up mud and dust, the noise deafening. We were P-47Ds, the Razorback model, and as we lumbered heavily into the sky with our external drop tanks, the early morning light catching the bulk of our wings, I felt every single ounce of the 7+ tons of my airplane. It felt slow. It felt vulnerable. The sheer difficulty of getting that much metal up to 30,000 feet in formation was a test of endurance in itself. My flight leader, a quiet man named Major Harding, came over the radio, his voice calm, cutting through the static. "All right, Spud, remember your training. We're going high and fast. The Hun wants to make you a turn fighter, don't let him. You have the altitude advantage. Keep the energy. Boom and zoom only. Keep your speed." The Germans hit us exactly where we expected them to. When the B-17s were running out of fuel and we were at the limit of our escort range, they swarmed us. I saw the distinct silhouettes of the Focke-Wulf FW-190s, the butcher birds, coming in high, sleek, and fast, looking like tiny black crosses against the pale blue. They were the Germans' best fighter, a fast, rugged machine, and at lower altitudes, a dangerous opponent. But up here, up at 28,000 feet, the advantage shifted. I watched as one of our pilots, a cocky kid named Pete, tried to break the rule. He saw a 1-90 on the tail of a fortress, and instead of diving to gain speed and then coming back up, he tried to turn inside the German. It was a textbook mistake. The 190, though sluggish, managed a tighter turn, and I saw the wicked yellow-orange tracers from its 20mm cannon stitch a line right through Pete's wing. The Jug, being the tough old beast she was, didn't disintegrate. The radial engine provided a literal shield to the pilot, and the air-cooled design meant no vulnerable radiators to be shot out like the Merlin-powered planes. But Pete lost control, went into a spin, and had to bail out. That sight, that perfect demonstration of the P-47's low-speed weakness, hammered Duke's lesson home. The enemy fighters began to realize we weren't playing their game. We didn't try to dogfight. We used the P-47's other secret power, her incredible dive speed. Because of the sheer mass of the plane and the highly robust wing structure, we could point the nose down and fall faster than anything else in the sky. It was exhilarating and terrifying. You'd drop the nose, push the stick forward, and the altimeter unwound like a watch spring that had snapped. The airframe would howl, the G-forces pressing you deep into your seat, and you'd hit speeds that made the control surfaces momentarily stiffen from the effects of compressibility, where the airflow over the wing nears the speed of sound. A German pilot who tried to follow us in a vertical dive would literally have his wings torn off by the strain, or the controls would lock up and he'd auger straight into the earth. It was a physical law that the Jug exploited masterfully. We'd dive, hit the deck at near supersonic speeds, blow past the German formation, fire our 8 half-inch machine guns, and believe me, 850 caliber machine guns firing 100 rounds a second turns an enemy fighter into Swiss cheese in a terrifyingly short amount of time. And then we'd use the speed we'd just gained to climb, or zoom straight back up to altitude ready for the next pass. Boom, zoom, repeat. It was less a dance of death and more an aerial form of shock and awe. I was flying as Harding's wingman when we finally got separated from the main group. The fight had been brutal, a swirling vortex of smoke, contrails, and tracer fire. We were running low on fuel, nursing the remaining drops in our tanks when 4 brand-new Messerschmitt Me-109s, likely from a newly deployed squadron, spotted us and decided we were easy prey. They were flying a textbook high-speed interception. They didn't try to outturn us. They were going for the kill with a series of quick slashing passes. They'd already seen the Jug's reputation for ruggedness. The air-cooled radial engine, remember, could lose multiple cylinders and keep running, and the Thunderbolt could soak up 20mm cannon rounds like a sponge, so they knew they had to be precise or just overwhelming. Harding and I were flying at 32,000 feet. The Germans were slightly below us, trying to climb to our level, burning off precious energy in the thin air. I remember thinking, this is it. This is the moment Duke warned us about. They're faster at low altitude, but up here we have the edge. We had the altitude, which meant we had the energy. Energy in a fighter plane is everything. It's the combination of speed and height, and it's something you never ever give away unnecessarily. The 109s were struggling, their climb rate flattening out the higher they went. I could almost hear their engines laboring, coughing for oxygen that the thin air just wasn't giving them, their horsepower falling rapidly. But our engines, the R2800, force-fed by that massive turbo behind us, they were purring, not smoothly, mind you, but with a raw, powerful roar, holding their power almost perfectly steady. We were faster, we had the height, and we had the deadly potential of the dive. So that's the situation I was in. I had 4 of the Luftwaffe's finest closing in, faster and more maneuverable than my Jug if I let them dictate the fight, but utterly crippled by the lack of air at 32,000 feet where I sat. They were climbing, trying to use the sun to blind us for their final attack run. My flight leader was on my left, both of us watching the rapidly closing specks of the enemy. I had to decide, play it safe and try to run using our superior top speed to disengage and head for home, hoping to shake them off and save my fuel? Or do I press the advantage of the only thing the Jug truly owned, its unique high-altitude power, and turn and fight? Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have banked on the defensive? Or would you have unleashed the Jug's deadly secret to go on the offensive, despite knowing how heavy and supposedly slow you were? Tell me, defend and run or dive and fight? I tightened my straps, the leather cutting into my shoulders, and felt the sweat cool on my back inside my sheepskin flight suit. Harding came over the radio, his voice still that terrifying level of calm. Spud, you see that lead 109? He's starting his run. He thinks he's got us. I could hear the click of his gun switch engaging. Execute Plan A now. Plan A wasn't running. Plan A was the P-47's entire philosophy boiled down to a single violent action. I didn't hesitate. I gave the stick a massive shove forward and kicked the rudder hard. The great heavy Thunderbolt, which felt so sluggish in a low-level turn, responded instantly, dropping its nose into a dive that was almost vertical. My vision tunneled for a moment as the world fell away. The force was tremendous. The airframe screamed as the airspeed indicator needle whipped past 450, 500, then almost 550 miles per hour, heading straight into the red line, the controls turning to solid granite in my hands. I'd seen the first 109 commit to his attack, turning to follow us into the dive, but he was already too late. He was a bird of prey that had just tried to follow a falling meteorite. I heard Harding's voice, a tight, clipped shout over the radio. Too fast. He's too fast. Pull, Spud, pull. I gave a violent, teeth-gritting tug back on the stick, using every ounce of my strength to bring that immense weight out of the dive. The P-47's robust wing spars held, resisting the hundreds of thousands of pounds of stress, and I felt the crushing G-forces almost make me pass out. But I was out level, still screaming along at nearly 500 mph, and I was behind the German formation that had tried to follow me. The lead Me-109 that had been right on my tail, the one I'd forced to dive with me, was gone. He hadn't pulled out. The speed, the strain, the sheer physics of it all had broken him. I saw a small puff of white smoke below me, and then a brief, violent flash of orange as his aircraft disintegrated against the forces he was never meant to endure. The P-47's deadly secret wasn't just its high-altitude power. It was its structural integrity and its unbeatable dive speed, born from its mass and its robust American-engineered construction. I zoom-climbed back up, using the immense speed I'd just bought with my dive, and arrived back at 30,000 feet, almost a mile away. But now I was above the 3 remaining 109s. They were completely disorganized, stunned by the loss of their leader, and the sheer speed of our maneuver. They had tried to catch the slow Jug, and the Jug had just physically destroyed one of their comrades with pure, unadulterated energy and weight. They tried to reform, but I had the height and the speed. I plunged down again, a controlled dive this time, lined up on the next 109, and opened up with all 850 calibers. The sound was like a giant ripping canvas right next to my head, a terrifying, beautiful torrent of destruction. The sheer mass of lead, that 3,400 rounds of ammunition carried on the P-47, overwhelmed the German pilot's ability to react. I saw chunks of his tailplane shear off, followed by a bright burst of flame from his wing root. I pulled up, my heart hammering against my ribs, and he tumbled away, spiraling, burning. The other two Germans didn't wait for an encore. They broke formation instantly and fled, not in a coordinated maneuver, but in sheer panicked flight, diving toward the cover of a cloud layer far below, heading for the low-altitude comfort they preferred. But the battle was already decided, and the consequences for them were immediate. They had given up their energy, and we had an open path home. Harding and I rendezvoused, our planes riddled with holes, our fuel tanks alarmingly low, but we were both breathing, and we were both heading west. He didn't say much, just a grunt of appreciation. "Spud, you flew the airplane right. Never forget what she is." The aftermath of that day and countless others like it reshaped the entire air war. The P-47, the so-called too-slow fighter, proved to be one of the most resilient and feared aircraft of the conflict. Its survival rate was the best of any single-engine fighter of World War II. Pilots came back with their tails looking like sieves, with massive holes in the wings, with entire cylinders blown off their engines, all thanks to that radial engine's design and the rugged airframe. The secret power wasn't just the dive or the guns or the engine. It was the turbo supercharger system that let us own the high-altitude skies and, by extension, own the energy advantage. By the time the sleek P-51 Mustang arrived with its long range, the P-47 had already done the hardest work, crippling the Luftwaffe's high-altitude fighter corps and clearing the way for the bombers to finally strike deep into Germany. The Germans had to change their entire strategy because of a plane they called a juggernaut, a name that became a badge of honor, short for Jug, the invincible flying tank. I finished the war flying the P-47. I saw pilots in other planes get shot down by single, well-placed cannon rounds that hit a vulnerable radiator or fuel line. My Jug took hits that would have vaporized a lighter plane, but that massive radial engine kept turning. The airframe kept flying, and I always made it home. The moral of the story isn't just about a fantastic airplane. It's a lesson in life. Never judge something on its apparent flaws, the things that make the P-47 seem slow or clumsy. Its size, its weight, its bulky ductwork were the very things that housed its core strength and granted it a power no one else had. A secret that made it utterly dominant in its chosen domain. We learned to fight a different way, to use what we had, to trade maneuverability for unassailable power and speed at altitude. We traded the dance for the decisive blow. So, if you enjoyed hearing about the real secret behind the slow P-47 Thunderbolt, and how its hidden power saved my life and turned the tide of the war, please hit that like button to let me know you were on my side in that moment over Germany. I want you to subscribe right now for more true stories about the hidden history and incredible feats of engineering that define our past. And finally, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. What's the Jug in your life? The thing people dismiss as too slow or too clumsy, but which secretly holds a power you know is unbeatable? I'll see you all in the next story.